a data user or a financial investor. And finally, the visionary of the next standard, potentially, Gary is responsible for cloud.org, cloudinc.org, right? Cloudinc.org is similar. Why don't you explain cloudinc.org?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, we'll start. Well, actually, I'll let everybody, so I don't butcher it, explain where they're coming from and their background and how it ties into this XBRL thing. So starting with Mr. Eric Cohen. Go ahead, your seat.
All right, guys, I want you to join me in a fantasy that someday a piece of business information, once it's typed into any computer, anywhere, never needs to be retyped, as it moves into an organization, around that organization, and is shared with others, both close people and moving along what they call the business reporting supply chain. This fantasy is one that's been going for around 12 years now, but it brought together some people who had such visions for a much longer time than that. One gentleman, his name is Charlie Hoffman, he had this vision that we're going to be able to take those reports, a financial statement, whatever the number is, 35,000, 40,000, 50,000 financials around the world that might be expressed on the internet. But if you try and pull information out in any kind of way, there's nothing consistent about it. You can't use HTML tables to get the number in a consistent fashion. And he said if we could just peel back that HTML document and look on the inside and underneath have the tags that XML brought to pass in 1998 or so, maybe some wonderful things can happen. I had a vision that came from a slightly different area, one that was helping small businesses to help with their own problems as they were sharing information. Maybe they had a service station accounting system that they need to have to talk to their general ledger, or they would work with a payroll provider and they got this big thick thing at the end of each payroll period. Their bookkeeper tried to figure out how do I take these numbers and put it into my accounting system. They would work with their CPA who would say, okay, find the gross payroll and then find this garnish and find this withholding, and we're going to gross up the payroll, not gross out if you happen to be an accountant, gross up the payroll. And here's the entry that you make into your accounting system. And then the bookkeeper would use that until the new revised form would come from their payroll provider, and they'd shed a tear and close down the desk and shut off the computer because they couldn't keep up with the business. And so a long time ago, just came up with this vision that wouldn't it be great if different accounting systems could work like Lego blocks, where you could take a general ledger from this accounting system, like the QuickBooks general ledger, the Simply accounting accounts payable system, the service management system, the Paychex being from Rochester, New York, or Payroll Plus or ADP payroll, and just have them all come together in one way. And so these different visions, a vision of the financial statements, the end reporting, a vision of the underlying information coming in from different sources, going into a small business, being able to be consolidated as it moves along. Maybe a small business person owns a retail chain here and a service station there and wants to bring that information together and not necessarily have someone have to pay to type it in spreadsheets and figure out the differences, and then share that with their CPA in a much more efficient fashion. These visions came together to turn what we know today as XBRL. I'll be speaking about that in a little bit more detail.
So, my name is Michelle Leader, and I run a site called footnoted.com now. I have to get used to the new name. It was footnoted.org for the first 7 years of its existence. And last year I sold the site to Morningstar, which is based in Chicago. And the site basically, the fundamental concept of the site is I am an end user of this financial data. And the concept of the site is basically companies bury all sorts of crap in their SEC filings with the hope that nobody will ever find it, because quite frankly, it's hard to find this information. It's, Citibank put out a 1,200-page 10K last month. There's nobody who's going to sit there for pleasure and read 1,200 pages of boring accounting speak. I mean, I don't think that even the lawyers who are, being paid to basically vet the information, $500 an hour, don't want to read this stuff. So the idea that, someone who owns 1,000 shares of Citigroup is going to actually take the time to sit there and sift through it is kind of ridiculous. So I'm basically coming at it from the point of there's all this information, all this really good information in the filings, and I can talk about some of those examples in greater length, but it could be anything like as simple as, last week Google filed something that talked about what their top executives are getting in bonuses. So it could be compensation information, for example, Patrick Fitchett, who I think is their CFO, got a $20 million bonus last year. Now, maybe that doesn't make a difference in whether I'm going to buy shares of Google or not, but it's like kind of interesting to have that information, and it's something that you would want to have if you were an investor or you had an interest in Google or something like that. You might also want to know, for example, one of the other examples we found a couple last year was that the CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch, the teen retailer, the guy spent $1 million on his personal use of the corporate jet. Now, as an investor if I was an investor in Abercrombie & Fitch, and I saw that the stock was tanking, and the stock actually went down 60% last year, I find it very interesting that the guy is spending $1 million on his personal use of the corporate jet, and why isn't he spending the time to run the company and turn things around? So I think that, that's where I'm coming at it, is like from the end user, and because I have a background as a financial journalist, I'm used to looking for the bodies, basically, for lack of a better word. I like to look for that sort of stuff, and I have a natural curiosity, but the fact is that it's very time-consuming and very cumbersome. I mean, we have a very small staff. For many years, it was really just me and my dog who were reading the filings, and my dog has gotten quite efficient at it, but is not, it's still a challenge. Now I have a small staff, and we're training, we're working on reading the filings, continue to work on reading the filings, but there's still, it's very much like you're pushing that rock up the hill. Even though we know where to start our search and how to go about and what we're looking for, and we have a lot of those tools in place and sort of that collective knowledge, there's still a lot of things that can just be, that can be greatly improved to help us get through that information quicker, faster. We've just finished 10-case season, and it was just bare. I mean, there were some days where there were like literally 1,000 filings, and we have a small staff of 5. How are 5 people going to get through 1,000 filings? It's just not going to happen. So
Is the dog on some website, financialretriever.com?
Yeah. The dog, I joke around that the dog is the brain behind the website, and he tells me where to sort of do the looking. So. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I've enjoyed being on this panel. It's interesting. If you think about South by Southwest so far through the event, right? You look at a lot of the panels that have been out there. There's been things on the digital self. There's been things on personal data and paying with data, right? What's interesting about this panel, and why I'm honored to be on it with some really bright folks, is what happens when the data is somebody else's, right? In this case, obviously, we're talking about business and government data. My name is Gary Thompson. I founded Cloud about 2 years ago. Cloud stands for Consortium for Local Ownership and Use of Data. The idea that the internet should start with people and not web pages. So there were 2 events in the spring of '09, one public and one private, that sort of took these seeds that I think have been sprinkled through my life and kind of took root. The public one was Facebook's terms of service. Remember that? They said, even if you delete your account, we own your profile. Really? No, you don't. And that thing became so mainstream by my definition is it's scamming, right? And I think people started to realize, hey, hold it. I got data about me in a lot of different websites. And just because I put it in that website doesn't make it theirs. The other piece of the story that led to Cloud was more private. My wife and I were driving from Austin to Houston to go to the MD Anderson Cancer Center. And we were driving a PET CT scan, and I really wanted her oncologist staff in Houston. And it was as if I was driving an X-ray, even though it was a digital image on a digital disc. And so I said to myself, you know what, this makes no sense. In the 21st century, the idea that our data is that disconnected not only in finance, but in this case health, didn't make much sense. So later this week, I did a TED Talk, had the honor of doing a TED Talk at TEDx Austin. So the more of the why of Cloud is in that little 18-minute nugget. They make sure that